Open an AI tool at work, ask for a client email, and the draft arrives before you know whether you can trust it. That is where most beginners get stuck. The market shows them the chat box and hides the judgment loop. The real question is not which AI tool is newest. It is what task you gave it, what context it has, what output you expect, and how you will check the answer. If you want benchmarks or code, this is the wrong room. Here, we are learning the work basics, vocabulary, limits, and one workflow for tomorrow. The missing basic. Here's the basic map. AI is not one app. It is the broad category. It covers systems that can recognize patterns, make predictions, classify information, generate outputs, recommend options, or help automate parts of a task. That is why the same word gets used for a spam filter, a voice assistant, a recommendation system, a chatbot, an image generator, and a tool that summarizes your meeting notes. So a beginner hears AI and imagines one brain behind every product. IBM's Public Explainer frames AI as a broad field, and that is the first useful correction. The chat box is one doorway into the category. You do not have to understand every model, every benchmark, or every company announcement before you can use AI more intelligently. A 2024 Microsoft and LinkedIn report surveyed 31,000 people across 31 countries and found 75% of knowledge workers using AI at work. That number explains the pressure, but it does not mean every beginner needs every tool. You need a cleaner mental map than the one the tool market gives you. The cleaner map starts by separating three things people blur together. There is the technology category, the product interface, and the workflow you are trying to improve. A beginner often opens the interface first and assumes the category is whatever the interface can do today. That is backwards. If you understand the category and the workflow, the interface becomes less intimidating. If you only memorize the interface, every product update feels like starting over. The vocabulary map. Start with the umbrella. Artificial intelligence is the term for systems designed to perform tasks we associate with human intelligence, like recognizing language, spotting patterns, making predictions, or generating content. Under that umbrella, machine learning is one major method. IBM describes machine learning as the subset of AI focused on algorithms that learn patterns from training data and then make inferences on new data. Plain English version, instead of a person writing every rule by hand, the system learns patterns from examples. That makes it statistical rather than mystical. Deep learning is a subset of machine learning. It uses neural networks with many layers, which is why people call it deep. Those layers help systems work with complex patterns in language, images, audio, and other messy data. Generative AI is the branch most beginners see now because it creates outputs. It can produce text, images, video, audio, code like drafts, outlines, summaries, and variations from a prompt and context. An LLM, or large language model, is one common kind of generative AI system for language. Picture an office worker asking an LLM to rewrite a messy update for a manager. The model does not know the politics of that manager, the promises made last week, or the one sentence that might sound defensive. It generates likely language based on the patterns it learned and the context you provide in that moment. That one sentence explains a lot of the magic and a lot of the trouble. If the context is thin, the answer may be thin. If the task is vague, the answer may sound polished while solving the wrong problem. If the facts matter, the output needs checking. The useful signal is not whether the answer sounds fluent. The useful signal is whether the system had enough context to produce something worth verifying. The model is not thinking in the same way a person thinks through your work politics, your client history, or your private constraints. It is generating from patterns and from the context you gave it, which is enough to be useful, but not enough to stop judging. The workflow loop. This is why better prompts is only half a beginner lesson. A prompt is not magic. It is a request plus context plus a standard for checking. The loop is simple. First, define the task. Second, give the context. Third, ask for a specific output. Fourth, verify the answer. Fifth, decide whether that output actually fits the workflow. That last part matters more than beginners expect. A tool can write a clean email draft and still miss the client relationship. It can summarize a document and still skip the one assumption that drives the decision. It can compare options and still use criteria that do not match your constraints. Picture a freelancer who asks AI to write a proposal. That request is technically a prompt, but it is not much of a workflow. The model does not know the client, the scope, the budget sensitivity, the tone, the deadline, or what has already been agreed. A better request says, draft a one-page proposal for a cautious small business client based on these notes with a calm tone, 3 deliverables, 2 risks, and a short next step section. That is not clever wordplay, that is context design. And even after that, the draft is not finished. You still check whether the deliverables are true, whether the tone fits, whether the risks are fair, and whether the next step is something you would actually send. NIST's trust framing is useful here because it reminds us that reliability, safety, transparency, explainability, privacy, and fairness are separate questions. A smooth answer only proves the model can produce a smooth answer. It does not prove the answer is reliable enough for your decision. The output is not the finish line, the check is. That is the part beginners rarely see in demos. A demo shows the answer arriving quickly. A workflow shows whether that answer survives contact with your actual constraints. The uncomfortable test is simple. Would this draft still make sense if your name were attached to it? What AI is good at? Once you see the loop, AI becomes less spooky and more useful. A good beginner starting point is work that benefits from speed, structure, and options. The next question is not, can AI do something impressive? The next question is, can I check the part it just helped with? Ask it to turn messy notes into a clean outline. Ask it to draft 3 versions of an email with different tones. Ask it to condense a long document, then list what it may have missed. Ask it to explain a spreadsheet column in plain English. Ask it to give you 5 possible angles for a presentation, then choose one yourself. Those are strong beginner tasks because the cost of checking is manageable. You can read the email, you can compare the outline with your notes, you can verify the summary against the document. You can decide whether the presentation angle fits your audience. This is the difference between using AI as a fast assistant and treating it like a silent authority. The assistant version gives you drafts, options, structure, compression, and a second angle. The authority version quietly takes over the standard. That is where beginners get into trouble. If you would not trust a new intern to send it without review, do not trust AI to send it without review. That line is not anti-AI, it protects the workflow. The safest beginner tasks usually have 2 traits. You can provide the source material, and you can judge the result. That is why summarize these notes is safer than tell me what strategy my business should use. That is why draft a polite reply using these details is safer than decide what I should promise this client. The more the task depends on hidden facts, private context, expert judgment, or real consequences, the more visible the human check needs to be. This is not a boring limitation. It is how you keep the useful parts of AI without outsourcing the risky parts of your work. Where beginners overtrust it. The hard part is that AI often sounds most confident when the user has the least context to judge it. That creates a strange beginner trap. When the answer is awkward, you know to be careful. When the answer is polished, you relax. But polish is not proof. NIST's 2023 AI Risk Management Framework and trustworthy AI materials separate trust into multiple dimensions, including valid and reliable, safe, secure and resilient, accountable and transparent, explainable and interpretable, privacy enhanced, and fair. That is a lot of words, but the beginner translation is practical. Do not ask only, did it answer? Ask, could this answer be wrong in a way that matters? If it is a birthday message, the risk is low. If it is a client promise, a hiring decision, a legal interpretation, a medical concern, a financial move, or a public claim, the risk is much higher. The answer may still be useful as a starting point. It just cannot be the final authority. This also explains why AI sometimes invents details. The model is built to generate plausible output from patterns and context. If the context is missing, weak, or ambiguous, it may fill the gap with something that sounds reasonable. For beginners, the fix is not paranoia. The fix is a checkpoint. Ask what sources it used. Compare the answer against the material you gave it. Look for names, dates, numbers, promises, and assumptions. Those are the parts most likely to create real-world damage if they are wrong. There is another overtrust pattern that shows up early. People ask AI to explain something they do not understand, and because the answer sounds clear, they assume the answer is correct. That can be helpful for getting oriented. It can also be dangerous if the topic is technical, legal, medical, financial, or high stakes inside a business. The better beginner habit is to use AI for a first pass, then compare it with a named source, a document you already trust, or a person who owns the decision. That extra move turns AI from a confidence machine into a thinking aid. Why the pressure is real but misleading. Now, the pressure people feel around AI is not imaginary. Microsoft and LinkedIn's 2024 Work Trend Index surveyed 31,000 people across 31 countries and reported that 75% of knowledge workers were using AI at work. It also reported that 46% of those users had started less than 6 months before the report. Treat it as a 2024 report about pressure, not a universal census. Human translation. A lot of people are learning in public, even if they do not say it that way. That is why beginners feel late. They are not comparing themselves with a quiet technology. They are comparing themselves with a tool category that showed up in meetings, job descriptions, client expectations, and casual office language very quickly. McKinsey's 2025 State of AI survey adds another useful piece. It reported that 88% of surveyed organizations were regularly using AI in at least one business function, up from 78% a year earlier. That is a 2025 survey signal, not a personal deadline. But the same broad picture also shows a lot of experimentation and piloting. Here's how I'd read this. Adoption is not the same thing as understanding. A company can have AI in one function and still not know how to redesign work around it. A worker can use AI every week and still not understand why one answer is useful and another is risky. Stanford's 2026 AI Index makes the same pressure visible at a wider level, summarizing broad economy and organization-level adoption signals, including organizational adoption around 88% and generative AI adoption reaching 53% in 3 years. Use the 2026 report as context, not destiny, because an adoption measure does not prove that every team has mature workflows or that every task is ready for automation. That is fast. But fast adoption is not a reason to chase every tool. It is a reason to learn the basics that travel from tool to tool. This is also why the beginner does not need to predict which company wins. The product names, model rankings, and interfaces will change, but the transferable skill is slower and sturdier. Can you define the job, supply the missing context, ask for an inspectable output, identify the risk, and decide whether the workflow improved? The first workflow to practice. So here's the practical beginner move. Pick one bounded task you already understand. Do not start with your highest stakes decision. Do not start with a task where you cannot judge the answer. Start with something like a meeting summary, a client email draft, a content outline, a spreadsheet explanation, or a comparison of options you already know. Then write the task in one sentence and add context. Who is the audience? What is the goal? What constraints matter? What source material should the model use? What tone or format do you want? Now ask for a specific output, not "help me with this." Ask for a 200-word email, a 5-bullet summary, 3 options with pros and cons, a table, a checklist, or a first draft with assumptions listed. The format matters because it gives you something easier to inspect. Then verify the facts, the missing context, the tone, the assumptions, and whether you would put your name on it. If the output passes, save the pattern. If it fails, do not just ask for better, name the failure. Say the tone was too formal, the summary missed the budget constraint, the comparison ignored setup time, or the draft made a promise you cannot keep. That is how you learn AI basics through use. You are not collecting prompts, you are building a reusable standard. The exit rule. For most viewers, the takeaway is simple. One verified workflow, beats 10 half-learned tools. The useful beginner can look at a task and say, this part needs options, this part needs context, this part needs checking, and this part still needs me. That is the calm version of AI fluency. It is knowing where the machine helps and where your judgment starts. Tomorrow morning, choose one task, give the AI the context, ask for a clear output, and check the answer before it becomes a decision. That is where the basics stop being vocabulary and start becoming a skill. If a coworker is stuck at the "which tool should I learn" stage, this is the line worth sharing. Start with the workflow you can verify. Drop one word in the comments for the task you would practice first: email, meeting, outline, spreadsheet, or research. The natural next lesson is how to build a reusable AI workflow without turning every task into prompt tinkering.